Victoria Brennan adjusted her navy blazer one final time before stepping into the restaurant. At 32, she had built CloudSync Technologies from a garage startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. Tonight was supposed to be simple, a business dinner with potential investor Ryan Torres to discuss expansion opportunities. Nothing personal, purely professional. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet elegance of expensive tastes. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across white tablecloths, and the scent of truffle oil and aged wine filled the air. Victoria spotted him immediately at the corner table, his dark hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit fitting like it was painted on. Ryan Torres looked up from his phone, and their eyes met across the room. Something electric passed between them, quick as lightning and twice as dangerous. First impressions can be deceiving, Ms. Brennan. Ryan stood as she approached, extending his hand. His grip was firm, confident, bordering on challenging. I've heard impressive things about your company. Mr. Torres, Victoria replied coolly, taking her seat. I hope you've also heard that I don't waste time on investors who aren't serious. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Direct, I appreciate that. Shall we order first, or would you prefer to jump straight into the numbers? They ordered, and the conversation began smoothly enough. Victoria presented her expansion plans with the precision of someone who had rehearsed every detail. CloudSync was ready to move into international markets, and she needed capital to make it happen. Ryan listened, occasionally nodding, his dark eyes never leaving her face. But then he leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass thoughtfully. Impressive presentation, he said. But your projections for the Asian market seem overly optimistic. Have you considered the regulatory challenges? Victoria felt her jaw tighten. Of course I have. My team has spent 18 months researching every market we plan to enter. Then perhaps you should have spent more time looking at the cultural barriers, Ryan continued. His tone casual, but his words cutting. Western tech companies often fail in Asia because they don't adapt. Your approach seems to ignore that entirely. When confidence meets criticism, the warmth drained from Victoria's face. Around them, other diners continued their meals, oblivious to the tension building at their table. She set down her fork with deliberate care. Mr. Torres, are you suggesting I don't understand my own business? I'm suggesting that passion sometimes blinds us to reality, he replied. Your growth has been remarkable, but expansion at this pace is reckless. The data doesn't support your timeline. Victoria's eyes flashed. The data. I've built this company from nothing. I know every number, every projection, every risk. What have you built besides a portfolio of other people's dreams? The words hung in the air like smoke. Ryan's expression hardened, the friendly facade cracking to reveal something sharper underneath. I've built enough to recognize when someone is overextending themselves, he said quietly. And I've saved enough companies from collapse to know the warning signs. CloudSync is brilliant, Ms. Brennan, but you're sprinting toward a cliff. Pride before the foul, Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several nearby tables glanced their way. Her hands trembled with fury as she gripped her clutch. This dinner is over, she announced, her voice low but intense. CloudSync doesn't need investors who lack vision. We'll find funding elsewhere. You mean you'll find someone who'll tell you what you want to hear, Ryan countered, remaining seated. That's not investing. That's enabling. And what you're doing isn't honest advice, it's sabotage, Victoria shot back. Did a competitor send you? Is this some kind of corporate espionage dressed up as a business meeting? Ryan finally stood, matching her intensity. I came here in good faith to discuss a potential partnership. I'm sorry if honest analysis offends your ego, my ego. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. You walk in here, spend 20 minutes dismissing years of my work, and I'm the one with the ego problem? The point of no return, other diners were openly staring now. The restaurant manager approached cautiously, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Victoria didn't care. The careful image she'd cultivated for years, the polished CEO who never lost her composure, shattered like glass.
Oh.
You know what your problem is, Mr. Torres? She continued, her voice rising. You're so used to playing it safe that you can't recognize real innovation when it's right in front of you. You want to invest in companies that follow predictable patterns because anything else terrifies you. Ryan's eyes darkened. And your problem, Ms. Brennan, is that you're so convinced of your own brilliance that you can't hear legitimate concerns. That's not confidence, that's arrogance, and it will destroy everything you've built. The words struck deeper than Victoria expected. For a moment, she stood frozen, her anger mixing with something uncomfortably close to doubt. But she pushed it away, buried it beneath layers of pride and fury. "Goodbye, Mr. Torres," she said coldly. "Don't contact my office again." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Behind her, she could feel his gaze burning into her back, but she didn't look back. "COULDN. Single quotes. Outside, the cool evening air hit her face like a slap. Victoria's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone to call her driver. The dinner had been a disaster, worse than anything she could have imagined. But more troubling than the ruined business opportunity was the way Ryan's words echoed in her mind. What if he was right? What if she was overextending? No. She shook her head firmly. She hadn't built CloudSync by listening to doubters and pessimists. She'd gotten this far by trusting her instincts. By taking risks others were too afraid to take. Ryan Torres was just another obstacle to overcome. She'd prove him wrong, show him and everyone else that her vision was solid. And when CloudSync dominated the international market, she'd make sure he knew exactly what he'd missed, what Victoria didn't know. As her car pulled away from the restaurant, was that fate had very different plans for her and Ryan Torres. Their story was only beginning. The next chapter would test everything she thought she knew about business. Pride and the unexpected places where love can take root. 3 months had passed since the disastrous dinner, and Victoria had successfully pushed Ryan Torres from her mind. CloudSync continued its aggressive expansion, securing funding from a consortium of European investors who shared her vision. She was proving him wrong with every quarterly report, every new market penetration, every success story that made headlines. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Victoria, we have a situation," her CFO, James Patterson, announced as he entered her office without knocking. His face was pale, his usually immaculate tie loosened at the collar. Nextech just announced a hostile takeover attempt. They're targeting both CloudSync and Torres Ventures simultaneously. Victoria's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "What?" "It's coordinated," James continued, spreading documents across her glass desk. "They're buying up shares in both companies, planning to merge us under their umbrella and strip the assets. The board is panicking. How is this possible? Our shareholder structure should have prevented this. They found a loophole." "And Victoria?" James hesitated. "There's only one way to stop them. You and Torres need to merge voluntarily before Nextech can force it. A united front is our only defense." The meeting nobody wanted, the conference room, felt smaller than it should have, despite its expansive windows overlooking the city skyline. Victoria arrived first, deliberately early, to claim psychological advantage. She wore her armor, a sharp black suit, her auburn hair pulled back severely, her expression carefully neutral. When Ryan walked in, she refused to acknowledge the way her pulse quickened. He looked tired, she noticed. Dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Good. At least she wasn't suffering alone. "Ms. Brennan," he said coolly, taking the seat directly across from her. "Mr. Torres," she replied with equal frost. Their lawyers and advisors filed in, creating a buffer zone of nervous energy between the two warring parties. For an hour, they discussed strategy, numbers, legal options. Every suggestion Victoria made, Ryan countered. Every plan Ryan proposed, Victoria dismantled. "This is impossible," Ryan finally said, standing abruptly. "We can't work together if you refuse to consider any viewpoint except your own." Victoria rose to match him, her eyes blazing. "I'm not the one being deliberately obstinate. You're sabotaging every reasonable proposal." "Reasonable? You want to structure the merger so you maintain controlling interest. That's not partnership, that's conquest. And you want veto power over every major decision. That's not partnership either, that's paralysis." Late-night revelations, the lawyers eventually left, frustrated and exhausted. Somehow, Victoria and Ryan remained, the conference room growing dark as the city lights flickered on below. Papers covered every surface. Coffee cups multiplied like mushrooms. And the tension had shifted from explosive to something more complex. "We're going to lose everything," Victoria said quietly, staring out at the skyline. "Both of us. Next Tech will tear apart what we've built and sell it for parts." Ryan stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woody and subtle. "I know. I hate this," she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "I hate needing help. I hate that you were right about my expansion being too aggressive. I hate that I'm standing here with the one person who saw my failure coming." He turned to look at her, and she was startled by the gentleness in his expression. "I wasn't right about everything. Your vision for Cloud Sync is brilliant. I was wrong to dismiss it so completely." Victoria faced him, searching his eyes for mockery and finding none. "Why did you come to that dinner, really?" "Because I was impressed," Ryan said simply. "A woman who built a tech empire before 30, who revolutionized cloud storage, who wasn't afraid to compete in a male-dominated industry. I wanted to be part of that. But then I saw the expansion plans and I panicked. I've watched too many brilliant people destroy their own companies by growing too fast. So you attacked me instead of explaining," Victoria said, but her voice lacked its earlier edge. "Yes, that was wrong. I should have approached it differently." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up its perfect styling. "You've scared me, Victoria. Your confidence? Your certainty. You were so sure of yourself that I felt threatened." The accident that changed everything, Victoria opened her mouth to respond. But at that moment, the conference room door swung open violently. A cleaning cart crashed through, pushed by a startled janitor who clearly hadn't expected anyone to still be there. The cart hit the table, sending papers flying and knocking over a precarious stack of binders. Victoria stumbled backward, her heel catching on a chair leg. Ryan's arms were around her instantly, pulling her against his chest as binders rained down around them. For a moment, they stood frozen in an accidental embrace, her hands gripping his shoulders, his arms solid around her waist. "I'm so sorry," the janitor stammered, backing out quickly and pulling the cart with him, but Victoria barely heard. She was acutely aware of Ryan's heartbeat against her cheek. The warmth of his body, the way his hands remained steady on her back, even though the danger had passed. When she looked up, his dark eyes were intense, searching her face with an expression that made her breath catch. "Victoria," he said softly, and her name sounded different in his voice. Stripped of formality and frost, she should step back. This was inappropriate, unprofessional, exactly the kind of complication she didn't need. But her body refused to listen to her mind, and instead of pulling away, she found herself leaning closer. Walls coming down, Ryan released her slowly, reluctantly, and they stood facing each other in the dim light. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "We should keep working," Victoria said, but her voice was unsteady. "Yes," Ryan agreed. Not moving, neither of them returned to their seats. Instead, they stood at the window, shoulders almost touching, looking out at the city that held both their empires. "Tell me about your first company," Victoria said suddenly. "The one you started before Torres Ventures." Ryan was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then it failed. Spectacularly. I was 25, arrogant, certain I knew everything. I ignored advice, pushed too hard, and watched it collapse in 6 months. I lost everything, including my marriage. Victoria turned to him, surprised. "I didn't know you were married." She was right to leave. I was impossible to live with, obsessed with success, unable to admit mistakes. He smiled sadly. "Sound familiar? Is that why you were so harsh at the dinner? You saw yourself in me? I saw someone about to make the same mistakes I did, but I handled it terribly. Instead of sharing my experience, I attacked yours." "I'm sorry, Victoria. Truly." The apology hung between them, genuine and unexpected. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a wall she'd built carefully over 3 months beginning to crumble. "I was arrogant," she admitted. "I still am. But Cloud Sync is my life. I built it from nothing, and the thought of losing it terrifies me more than I want to admit." "You won't lose it," Ryan said with quiet certainty. "We won't let that happen. We." He looked at her directly. "Yes, we. If you'll trust me enough to actually work together instead of against each other." Victoria studied his face in the reflected city lights. This man had humiliated her, challenged her, seen through her carefully constructed confidence to the fear beneath. He should be her enemy. Yet standing here, seeing the vulnerability in his expression, she felt something unexpected blooming in her chest. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's try this again. Real partnership this time." Ryan extended his hand, and when she took it, the handshake lasted longer than necessary, his thumb brushing against her wrist in a gesture that might have been accidental, but felt deliberate. "Tomorrow, we face next tech together," he said. "Tonight, let's figure out how to make this merger work." They returned to the table, but something fundamental had changed. Their discussions flowed more smoothly, compromises came easier, and occasionally their hands would brush, reaching for the same document. Sending small electric shocks through Victoria's system, by the time dawn painted the sky pink and gold, they had the framework of a plan. More importantly, they had the beginning of something neither had expected: understanding, respect, and the first fragile threads of trust that might, given time, grow into something neither dared name yet. 6 weeks into their forced partnership, Victoria and Ryan had developed a rhythm that surprised everyone, including themselves. The merger was progressing smoothly, their combined companies presenting a united front that had successfully blocked Nextech's hostile takeover attempts. But more significant than the business success was the shift. In their personal dynamic, morning coffee meetings became the highlight of Victoria's day. Ryan had a terrible habit of making jokes during serious presentations that made her struggle not to laugh. She discovered he volunteered at a youth entrepreneurship program every Saturday, mentoring kids from underprivileged backgrounds. He learned that beneath her Ice Queen exterior, she had a weakness for terrible romantic comedies and Rescued, Three-Legged Cats. The attraction between them had grown impossible to ignore, though both stubbornly refused to acknowledge it aloud. Lingering glances across boardrooms, hands touching during document exchanges, the way her heart raced when his cologne filled the elevator they shared each morning. They were walking a tightrope between professional and personal, and the fall seemed inevitable. Then everything collapsed in a single afternoon. The phone call. That shattered illusions. Victoria was reviewing merger contracts when her personal phone rang. Displaying a number she hadn't seen in 5 years, her stomach dropped. "Hello, Vicky," the voice on the other end purred. Derek Chen, her ex-business partner and former fiancé. The man who had stolen her original company's prototype and sold it to competitors, nearly destroying her before CloudSync even began. "How did you get this number?" Victoria's voice was ice. "I have my ways." "Congratulations on the merger, by the way. Very impressive. Though I wonder if your new partner knows the whole truth about CloudSync's origins." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What do you want, Derek?" "Nothing much. Just thought you should know that I've been talking to some journalists. They're very interested in the story of how CloudSync's core technology was actually developed by 2 people, not 1. How you conveniently left your partner's name off all the patents. You know that's a lie. You stole my work and tried to sell it. I have documentation proving everything. Do you? Because I have documentation too. Very convincing documentation that tells a different story. One where brilliant Derek Chen was pushed out by his ambitious girlfriend who wanted all the glory for herself. Dead. I want $10 million, Victoria. Or this story goes public, and your merger falls apart when Torres discovers his new partner built her empire on theft. The line went dead. When trust faces its greatest test, Victoria sat frozen, her hands trembling. She had never told Ryan about Derek, about the darkness that preceded CloudSync's birth. It had seemed unnecessary ancient history that didn't affect their current situation. Now that silence felt like a lie of omission. She found Ryan in his temporary office, laughing at something on his computer. When he saw her face, his smile vanished instantly. Victoria closed the door, leaning against it for support. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago." For the next 30 minutes, she laid bare the whole story. Derek Chen, their relationship. The partnership that turned toxic, his betrayal and theft, her struggle to prove the technology was hers, the legal battles that drained her savings and nearly broke her spirit, how she'd rebuilt everything from ashes. Driven by fury and fear and desperate determination to prove she wasn't a victim. Ryan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, silence filled the room like water rising in a sinking ship. "Say something," Victoria whispered. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I wanted you to see me as strong and successful, not as someone who'd been betrayed and nearly destroyed. Because I thought it didn't matter anymore. And now? Now he's threatening to go public with a false story, claiming I stole from him. He wants $10 million or he destroys both our reputations and tanks the merger." Ryan stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Victoria watched his shoulders tense, waiting for the explosion, the accusation, the end of everything they'd built together. "The confession that changes everything. I was engaged once," Ryan said quietly, still facing the window. "I told you the marriage failed, but I didn't tell you why. Her name was Carolyn. We were building a company together, and I was so obsessed with success that I didn't notice she was falling apart. The stress, the endless hours, my constant criticism when things didn't go perfectly. She had a breakdown, and I was so focused on the company that I barely noticed until she was hospitalized." He turned to face Victoria, and she was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "She survived, but she never forgave me. Neither did I when the company failed. I told myself it was financial, but the truth was simpler. I destroyed it through my own obsession and cruelty. When I met you at that dinner, confident and brilliant and pushing so hard, I saw myself. I saw someone headed for the same cliff I'd jumped off, and instead of helping, I attacked." Victoria crossed the room without thinking, taking his hands in hers. "Ryan, I judged you harshly because I was terrified of you making my mistakes. But you're not me, Victoria. You built CloudSync with integrity, even when someone tried to destroy you. You fought back legally, ethically, and you won. That takes strength I never had. I didn't feel strong. I felt desperate. Desperation and strength aren't opposites. Sometimes desperation is what makes us strong enough to survive." He squeezed her hands gently. "We're not paying Derek anything. We're going to fight this together, and we're going to win. Love, born from truth, together." Victoria's voice cracked. "Did you really think I'd abandon you over this? Victoria, He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I'm in love with you. I have been for weeks. Maybe since that night we worked until dawn, when you fell asleep on my shoulder during the cab ride home and I realized I'd never felt so content just sitting still." Victoria's breath caught. "You were awake for that? Every second. Memorizing the way you looked peaceful for once, not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders?" He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You're brilliant and fierce and absolutely terrifying, and I don't want to face another day without you beside me." "I love you too," Victoria whispered, the words escaping before fear could stop them. "I didn't want to. You're arrogant and overprotective, and you make terrible jokes during important meetings. You laugh at them, though." "I hate that I do." But she was smiling. Really smiling for the first time in weeks. Ryan kissed her then. Soft and gentle, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. Victoria melted into him, 6 weeks of tension and denial pouring into the kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the world felt fundamentally changed. Fighting together, the next 72 hours were a whirlwind. Ryan's legal team uncovered Derek's fabricated documents within hours, traced them to a disgraced lawyer who'd been disbarred for falsifying evidence. Victoria's original patents, time-stamped and verified by multiple independent sources, told the true story clearly when Derek's threats materialized as a smear article in a tabloid. Victoria and Ryan held a joint press conference. Standing side by side, they told the real story. Her triumph over betrayal. His journey from failure to redemption, Our partnership built on mutual respect and hard-won trust. The public response was overwhelming. CloudSync's stock soared. Torres Ventures received record investment offers. But more importantly, Derek Chen found himself facing criminal charges for extortion and fraud. 3 months later, Victoria stood in Ryan's apartment, now partially hers, watching the sunset paint the city gold. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and she leaned back into Ryan's chest with a contentment she'd never imagined possible. "Thinking about the dinner?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Thinking about how wrong everything went and how right it turned out. I was an arrogant fool that night." "You were, but so was I." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "We needed to break before we could build something real." "Speaking of building," Ryan said, his voice nervous in a way that made her heart skip, "I've been thinking about our future. The merged company is thriving, but I want to merge something else." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Victoria's breath stopped. "I love you, Victoria Brennan. You challenge me every day, you make me better, and you never let me get away with anything. Will you marry me and argue with me for the rest of our lives?" Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she laughed and nodded simultaneously. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, catching the sunset light. When Ryan kissed her, Victoria tasted salt and joy and the promise of a future they'd build together. As partners in every sense of the word, their story had started with fury and ended with love. The CEO, who got furious at a dinner invitation, had indeed ruined everything, but only to make space for something far better than either could have planned. Sometimes the best things in life come from spectacular disasters, from pride meeting its match, from two stubborn hearts finally surrendering to the inevitable. And as the city lights flickered on below them, Victoria and Ryan stood wrapped in each other's arms, ready to face whatever came next together, knowing that their greatest strength wasn't their individual brilliance, but their united front against whatever challenges the world might throw their way. The end was really just the beginning.